to kick us off immediately in this conversation that we're starting and then going to open up to the audience, I would first want to articulate that prolate geology and as a science and me as representing that science is fully solidary with what you have expressed as the struggle of natural history against imperialist science. I think that this is something that we share. What I was particularly captured with in your presentation was your statement, which I think is totally true, is that it is capitalism that's utopian. Like, we are not imagining weird stuff when we're putting marks on Dickinsonia. This, this is more realistic in many ways than, whatever they imagine the end state of what they're doing now to be. And I was wondering, like, how do you develop tools? Since I guess that's part of this part of the conference, how do you develop tools to make that point that it is you who are actually in, it's becoming more and more clear on social media, but it's you who are in the fever dream, so to say.
Do you want to talk about it in relationship to the work on, like, the question of how to dislodge the naturalness of the Hoover Dam, for example, or the work that's being done to expose how it never really worked, if the question of working is to, reproduce a healthy environment where people can thrive?
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. I mean, the economists are the ones that are always predicting the future. They're the ones that, are on the mouthpiece of capitalism. I mean, we don't have a healthy critical economics profession. I mean, there are some few people who do that, and they are working in tandem with, these people who try to measure and project what the future of the river is going to be, and all of the entire history of the Colorado River and its tributaries, like the Salt River that goes through Phoenix, is one of not realizing this future projected utopian, well, we can say it's a dystopia for the rest of us, project that is capitalism in the Salt River Valley. So the early diversions, a lot by Mormon settlers and others that were coming in, ex-Confederates, coming with a racist world viewpoint, came in, diverted the water, flooded fields, and then they ran out. So there's never been sustainability in this system, and they always have to build more and more infrastructure to try to aggregate more and more water to satisfy this appetite of growth. And that is the fantasy that you're referring to. So, yeah.
And just to expand on this in terms of, like, because you're asking about tools as well, and tools that people can and are using. One of the big kind of campaign tools that people are using, more in the Pacific Northwest, around dams, is campaigns to remove old, kind of disused or barely functional, terribly inefficient dams on, like, the Snake River. Mm-hmm. So people have been building campaigns, like popular movement campaigns, to build power around movements to remove dams. Mm-hmm. Those I've heard you speak about, Andrew, are like excellent campaigns, but we haven't yet seen campaigns organized around, in a sense, these impossible demands within capitalism, like, why don't we start with the kind of impossible demand? Let's remove these energy infrastructures, these infrastructures that have become naturalized on the landscape and have made it that are the primary contributors to drought and all of these concerns that the climate futurists have. And to start from the future that needs to happen, and then to ask, how do we get there?
Yeah, like a project of taking down mega dams.
Yeah.
The Hoover Dam. That is seen as an impossibility, even in its aesthetic. Or the Glen Canyon Dam, there are these huge concrete walls, that are often talked about as these monuments of human innovation and progress, and so they're tied in with narratives of modernization, and so they become this thing where it's like human endeavors, and people can create all of these grand infrastructures, and we don't critically think about their histories, the legacies of dispossession, and how they continue to perpetuate water inequalities and environmental change, dramatic environmental change, unprecedented environmental change in the Colorado River Basin. So yeah, these infrastructure projects are things that are become the impossible campaigns that that maybe we can start to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it resonates with, you know, I've studied or worked with Nubians for quite a long time, and this resonates so deeply with how they talk about the Aswan Dam, which, you know, has flooded an entire valley, displaced, you know, enormous populations. And then they all told me, it's like, this thing will stop working in the next 5 years because of all the mud that's accumulated in front of it, and it barely worked since the beginning. So this really, you know, like, they're always projected to provide this, you know, abundance of energy all around, you know, all around the towns, and then actually the towns are emptied out and there's just no one there. And now they're building another one in Ethiopia. I saw this morning, I was scrolling on Twitter and I saw this. Unfortunately, Twitter now pushes Elon Musk even when you don't follow him. And so it showed this tweet of Elon Musk, and there was this kind of like funny meme, that thing that he does, like there was a frog holding the sign 2 + 2 is 4, and then the image of a liberal or whatever it is, you know, with all these questions around questioning this 2 + 2 is 4. You know, what are your sources? You know, are you sure? You know, what environment are you considering this? And it was funny, there was like a comment underneath from supposedly a mathematician saying, this man has clearly never been to a mathematics class, because this is a very valid question. You know, like, is 2 + 2 really 4, and what is, you know, what is the axiomatic paradigm in which we're thinking, you know, this question? And that, you know, that thinking also about, you know, the discussion we were going to have in relation to that not so funny, or maybe funny in a different way, image, is that it appears to me that in science, there are many very subtle yet substantial ways to undermine the status quo of imperialist science. They are already there. These ways of thinking are not only like in, you know, faraway humanities departments that are underfunded and on the brink of extinction. They are in hardcore science as well. These people think actually in very complex ways about things that, you know, should be obvious, quote unquote, like 2 + 2 is 4. And how, you know, you have engaged with museums, right? And with people that are most likely working in geology, working in history. And I'm so curious, and I mean, this is also a question to myself, like, is how do we kind of unearth this provocative aspect that is in science and make it more militant, make it more, you know, bring that out. It's like, no, 2 + 2 is not necessarily for fuckhead. Like, you know, like, we really have to think about this. Are you actually thinking about this?
I mean, I think that this is like a really important question. It's at the, I mean, not 2 + 2 is 4, but the question.
We radicalize scientists. We have to radicalize scientists, right?
Is really at the crux of the Red Natural History Project, and is sort of like you're describing the breach that we're trying to start to enter and engage. And this has to be a long-term project, right? This stuff does not happen overnight, and that's something that I just need to stress from the get-go, because we'll feel like massive failures if, you know, the 8 Red Natural History Fellows and the like 4 non-scientists that are involved in organizing alongside them is going to produce a massive cultural and institutional shift within the very complex network of institutions and funding structures, and even the United States, not to mention around the world, that are geared towards keeping science from entering the political fray, in a sense, or like incentivizing research that supports the status quo, whether it be that is directly applicable to military operations, or that is directly applicable to technological developments. But so it's a big problem in a big issue that we're trying to start grappling with. And the way that we're trying to start grappling with it is by building, at the very least, a kind of culture that is on the side of these major institutions, and also inside these major institutions, because many of the people that we're working with are working in these institutions, right, that can at least put these kinds of questions on the table and normalize them in a certain way. This is, like, it feels really unsatisfying given the state of the world and all of the crises that we're facing. But one of the things that the right has done amazingly in the last 30 years is investing in basic research, investing in concepts, in developing think tanks that will churn out stories about the world that are compelling to working people. In the United States, we see the results of that 30, 40-year project. The left has not historically, at least in the last 40 years in the United States, it hasn't been strong enough, in a sense, to be doing that kind of basic ideological and critical intellectual work within the major institutions, and there's many different reasons for that. They're not because of the failure of leftists to have strong backbones. Like, there's a lot of repression, and there's a lot of incentive structures, including in, like, the tenure process and these sort of things in these institutions. But those are, but I don't want to leave those as excuses, but as real concrete problems that actually demand us now to be pushing, you know, to kind of initiate this work, and also just to aggregate the work that's already being done. Because, like, I mean, we didn't, like, bring together 8 people who had never, you know, thought about these ideas and said, what do you think about these ideas? Do you want to seed them? There's a whole, there is a research culture. It's just not, in a sense, even federated, you know, in a way where people are seeing themselves doing, participating in a common project. I mean, Andrew would be much more capable of talking about the realities of doing this kind of work in academic institutions, in scientific research cultures, because you're the actual social scientists here.
Yeah, I work at the University of Arizona, which is a colonial institution. It was founded for teaching people how to mine the earth, right? One of its first colleges was College of Mining back in the 1880s, and basically you didn't have to have any qualifications to be admitted. They're just trying to educate people, right? That has been a long-standing project of these public institutions. And I think what's important is to think about how these public institutions, especially in the United States, are based on colonialism. Some of the things that we think of as progressive ideas, even like dams, right? Dams as these big mega projects, as large employers, you know, it's seen as a high point of the welfare state in a positive sense of the word. But it is this colonial foundation, literally and figuratively, for the displacement of people's water access and the creation of these new kinds of environmental problems along what is now called the Colorado River, which had many names prior to that by the 22 indigenous people in only the state of Arizona alone that are federally recognized, and the 30 plus that are in the whole basin. You know, each one of those nations had their own relationship with the river that is displaced through these large projects. So the science is institutionalized. It's funded by the theft of indigenous lands. You know, there was this big report in High Country News a couple years ago about how land grant universities were funded through the commodification of indigenous land. First it's dispossession, then it's selling off, and those monies became the basis for large endowments for a lot of the universities, the public universities that expanded across the United States. So a lot of these institutions are built on those premises, and they're unquestioned. So it's not even about, like, censorship, it's just assumptions, you know, people come into with their research. And then when you say, hey, you're a white guy doing research that's colonial, then people are like, what? And then at first they get offended, and then they think that I'm some sort of kind of fringe academic, and like, okay, we'll include them on the grant as, you know, and then there's this way of including me on these projects. And then I'm bought out. Then you no longer see me at these conferences. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But no, that's a whole part of the production of knowledge that is common, that you're speaking to, right? That are part of these institutions, the incentive structures, the way people see themselves and the kind of work they're doing. And a lot of times they're just unaware, like a lot of people in the United States are unaware of the history of colonialism, and it's been made more so, right? There's this whole effort to undermine these colonial and racist histories of the United States, where you can't even say that stuff exists. I'll stop talking right there.
No, what really excites me is that, you know, like, when I hear you talk like this, it feels as if the proposition for red natural history is actually your modest face. Because I feel that underneath that is a red university, or like a red science in general, right? It is not just, natural history is just one of the entry points, right? In the same way that, you know, when we talk about predate geology, geology is just an entrance point, right? We have to think about what is a red mathematics, what is a red economy, economics, right? I mean, some people have said some stuff about that, right? What is a red linguistics that's not like Stalin saying that Russian is the oldest language? And you know, I think these are really interesting questions that I don't know whether we will solve them today, but there may be questions from the audience that can bring us slightly further. I know that Jonas, are you going to? And I see a hand over there.
First line.
I mean, I'm usurping the role of the moderator. I'm not sure if that was the.
We didn't get a chance to ask you a
If this
question.
was the, you know, we need red moderation. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you so much for coming all the way from the US. And I always find these land struggles in the US and also the Americas always very inspiring. And then when I think about the context that we are in here in the Netherlands, I do always ponder, because the Netherlands is such an industrialized country. There's almost no nature in this country, or at least it has been largely managed and controlled. And especially if we think about like water, like you were talking about the dam, and if we think about the very foundation of this country, it has been about managing water and building infrastructure to make this land habitable. So the very cities, every city here in the Netherlands, the origin of it is people coming here, managing the water, controlling the water. And so my question is, and we have also now gotten to the point where we definitely like over-extract, also here in the Netherlands, where we over-extract our rivers and the water in the sea. But at the same time, there's certain infrastructure, let's say the dikes or the canals that make living here possible in its foundation. So how do we disentangle this like overproduction and over-extraction of the infrastructure with the very necessity to have the infrastructure to make life even possible here? Or do we just move out of the Netherlands and say like give it back to the swamp?
I'll
give it
to the Frisians.
Okay.
To the Frisians, there is a people who lived with the land as it was and used the land as one of the oldest guerrilla armies of Europe. The only ones who were effectively able to fight to combat the Roman Empire through the use of knowledge of their land. Side note, yes.
So I'll give the beginning of an answer, and maybe one of you can help finish it. Which is as a point of clarification. Oftentimes, when people are newly introduced to the questions of indigenous politics in North America, they might come with a misconception that the alternative to, say, managing the land or water is like a kind of laissez-faire, letting the water be. But Andrew's work has shown, and many of the people that we're working with are really invested in showing us how the question is not, do we manage the water and land or not, but how do we manage the water or land? Do we manage it in such a way that it's producing, like the conditions for like a thriving collective life, for civilizations, for communities? Or is it, managed in such a way that it's producing massive inequality, whether it be urban or rural, And so the question of do we or don't we is not such a question. It's like, how do we manage land? Because there was never a time when the area that we call the United States was not managed. The question of how it was managed
as a on the principles of capital accumulation, that's a modern development, right? That came with colonial expansion.
I mean, I could answer that following up. Julie de Lima yesterday brought in Boskalis, one of the largest reclamation companies that exports precisely this technology that allows us indeed to live here in modestly rainy circumstances, to, you know, Singapore, Hong Kong, Philippines, to build, you know, an absolute climate catastrophe in the Gulf, right? These islands that are so-called inhabited by the millionaires that never came and now are slowly sinking. And that's precisely the question. You know, how do we use this knowledge in either creating life or creating death? I mean, however you want to put it. How do we critically examine the ways in which Dutch technologies enable politics that are destructive to the environment, which, you know, when it comes to water management, are, as was just indicated, very frequently are. They may not necessarily be here because, oh, look at all this land and it's so nice and we can live here for, you know, another 5 years until we inundate yet. But I think it's a question of how to critically interrogate them and think actually about, okay, this knowledge can be used in many different ways. Where does it come from and where does it go?
Andrew, final response before we...
Yeah, I'll just make a quick response. So from my perspective, you know, I don't know enough about the history of the Netherlands to say, you know, whether or not you should take down your infrastructure. But probably lean yes, just to be safe. But one of the important things that happens, you know, is the history of how these ideas, right, this legacy of like we reclaim the sea for this and that, is imported into the United States, you know, historically. And then they look at the Netherlands as an example and they take it into places that aren't appropriate. So I'll plug the work of my colleague, Jen Rose Smith, who's EOC. She's an indigenous person from Alaska, and she wrote this article about temperate normativity, how you take ideas of environmental engineering in temperate areas and you apply them into non-temperate areas, like the US Southwest, regardless of the difference in circumstance.
There, yes. Okay.
So we've been talking about, like yesterday we talked about words, today we talked a bit about words, and obviously we all recognize that all revolutions need to create new words and get rid of old words, or get rid of words that are too linked to the things we no longer wish. And for me, as a queer, anarcho, eco-communist, the word nature is problematic. It feels to me that the nature-culture dualisms is the mother of all these dualisms. And without getting rid of that word, probably both words, yeah, I can't see how we're going to have a truly reciprocal relationship with the living. So I was interested in, you're still using the word natural. Has that been a discussion within your collectives? And yeah.
I can give again a preliminary and not the complete answer. But there is a difference between nature and natural history. Natural history is the as I say, not just the study of the world as it transforms under social, political, and ecological forces, but it's also the way in which the world transforms. It's both the study of and the actual transformation of the world, which is never static. What I think is really useful about the term natural history is it asks us to historicize those transitions and transformations, right? That we may have like at some point in history, someone may have thought were happening outside of human intervention. But I don't even know at what point people thought that, you know, nature as so-called outside didn't transform under human intervention. Maybe somebody has the historiography of that. I don't. But I think that there's something really important in holding on to that as a project, because we need to know our coordinates about what we're talking about. What we're talking about are the dialectical relationships between people and their environments. Now, we can talk about, red environmentalism, but I'd rather not, because that's a very specific thing, right? So also entering traditions in order to split them from within is central to the work that we've done. Our principle is not let's invent new terms. It's how do we kind of intervene into discourses and reinscribe the terms that already exist, that people are already using, in such a way that they can be useful for our struggles, that they can orient us. And that's what Red Natural History for us is doing. Andrew's been in these conversations for 4 or 5 years now. And I don't know if you have other things to say about Red Natural History as a term and how it felt to you when we came to you with this question, because people don't talk about natural historians. It's like an antiquated term. But one of the things that I sort of love about it is it's a big bucket term. We don't use it because of the specialization of disciplines, right? So we talk about, geographers, geologists, ecologists. There was a time in which we were talking about all of these things adding up into one kind of project, which is the project of understanding the world as it transforms. So that's another reason, anyway, that I am really committed to actually maintaining that term.
I'll try to be quick. I agree with the premise of the question. I think language is important, so thank you for asking it. And it reminds me, I want to apologize for having to speak in English. I know that I'm in a country that, this is kind of like an imperial language in some ways. It's an imposition, but I can't do otherwise. What I try to do, and other indigenous scholars, what we try to do is recover philosophies and reutilize them in our own science. So we'll try to use our own language to describe the same things that are otherwise being described and given names by people we don't know. Like, just language recovery is very important in the natural world, in like the deep history that you work on, and also like the landscapes around us, the mountains, the rivers, all of those kinds of things. We want to recover our original names for them. The concepts, keep it in the ground. It's an idea that we talk about. It's a scientific idea, I think, that is coming out of activism, and we have a language around that for things like uranium. We talked a little about uranium yesterday, and we're saying, like, we don't want uranium. We don't want nuclear power. We don't want these things. And we have a whole reason for that. So anyway, like recovering our own language, I think that's important for dealing with these concepts. So sorry, that's not really talking about the history of the red natural in its name. But I think red talks about a couple different things, in certain traditions, not necessarily Dene, but other tribes, you talk about red people as being the people of the earth. And so it has a double meaning in some ways as being, I think. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Maybe from very briefly, from the perspective of prolet-geology, and also heeding what you talked about as a fight among comrades, a friendly fight among comrades. I would say from a prolet-geological perspective, abolish nature, abolish culture, fuck them. Yeah. These are terms that I don't think I have used in any affirmative sense, and if I did, then I should definitely, scrap them from from the talk that I gave. They are useless. They are useless when we are faced. We are not, when we are faced with, these creatures. These are direct. I mean, you could think of them as negating precisely that dualism, and I think that that's part of their power of the visualization. Yeah.
Before we move on to another question from the group, we haven't asked you a question about prolet geology yet.
I mean,
so
you will create it
and
by
that
asking
might
the question.
actually be the last question.
And you will help create the field by asking it.
Because there is amongst Maria and Jean and me and the team, there's this fanatical desire for our events to take at least 10 hours. But that's not necessarily shared by all comrades in the room. We want to be mindful of the original schedule, and this will be our last round of exchange.
Now I feel very guilty, but So actually, I want to bring our attention to the comrades, you know, that we have around us, these Ediacaran comrades. And so when I look at these figures, I'm actually seeing a kind of a challenging, almost dialectical, contradictory sort of composition, which is while the Ediacaran life world was one of non-predation, of healthy coexistence, as you narrate in Jonas's video, none of these comrades who occupied their heads were particularly like they believed in, you know, militant, combative struggle. And so it's an invitation to ask, like, okay, so what is the dream that they share? You know, you talk about the dreaming. What is the dream that Mr. Lenin shares with, what is the name of the...
This one is Kernia, I think.
Kernia, yeah. So what is the dream that they share? And this is an invitation for you to just think about the relationship between the kind of origin of life story and the practical realities of mobilizing that origin of life story in conflict as we see it in the last 500 years.
Thank you. That's a really nice question. I think it's a great question to end with. So, yes, these were all lovingly cohabitating on the planet, but let us not forget that they were the dominant species on Earth and literally covered the entire ocean floor. So, domination is in the end what the end game is. We want the ways of thinking that we believe will at least carry us maybe another millennium to be the dominant ones. You know, why otherwise would we struggle? Why otherwise would we do this? Right? Because we believe that the other ways that we've been discussing this entire weekend, these other ways of doing, these other ways of thinking, are actually maybe not going to lead to our wholesale extermination. And in order for us to succeed, the idea should dominate just like the Ediacarans dominated the world for 94 million years, which I think is a rather modest proposal considering the lifespan of the entire fucking universe, right? So that is a possible beginning of an answer.
Thank you.
Andrew, can I just ask you, because this touches directly on the history of our fossil record, the question of which forms of life are fossilized and which are not, the recognition that when we speak of fossil fuels, we are talking about millions of years of aggregated Earth memory, Earth work, Earth labor. I know that you have worked specifically a lot on the question of how Indigenous people, First Nations people relate to what is in contemporary terms then called coal or oil, rather than Earth memory and Earth inheritance. Could you, as a closing remark, say something about this?
Yeah, it's part. I like the idea of challenging the temporality that is sometimes implied with the way we think about deep history and deep time, and to think about how these organisms, these historical matter, which are now being exploited in the form of coal, oil, and gas, develop a new kind of social relation. And that's something that I was doing my research on with coal miners. How are they interacting with this substance, you know, and what do they think about it when they're digging it out of the earth as coal, and then when it eventually becomes energy and becomes greenhouse gases, and the cumulative impact of all those practices over time. So it does have a contemporary relationship with us. In fact, it's the main, climate anxiety is coming from the stuff that we're interacting with from what we consider deep history. It's a very contemporary history, and it's one that is shaping how we think about the future. So that's why maybe like blurring these temporal ideas, the idea of linear time, as you were saying in the intro, is helpful. Is more helpful than it is harmful, right? I think it does help us actually appreciate this matter more, and then to get out of that commodity fetish that it has inhabited in a capitalist economy. So that's a short way to do it.
Andrew Curley, Steve Lyons, Vincent van Gerven, OI, the meeting of Red Natural History and Parallel Geology. Thank you so much for this assembly.